What if I told you you have the natural talent to remember things the first time you see them? To remember things with 90% accuracy, and to remember things without even trying? Well, today I'm going to share the 4 science-backed memorization strategies that help me go from an average undergraduate student to scoring straight high distinctions in my master's. First, let's start with how to remember things with 90% accuracy. And surprisingly, the biggest thing here isn't what strategy you use or how smart you are. It's about using a form of information that's easier to remember. See, in a study titled Photographic Memory, researchers found we can remember things with 90% accuracy by using a technique called mental photography and simply focusing on absorbing visual information. This is because 90% of the information our brains normally receive is visual, and so our memories have been optimized for it. But this reveals our biggest problem, because when we read things, we're not actually absorbing visual information, we're actually absorbing auditory information, which, according to the study, is only half as memorable. Thankfully, we can get around this through using the same approach used by world memory champions, and that's to use visual information as the foundation of what you want to remember, and then use proven tactics that boost your visual memory. So here's my strategy that's so effective that one time it let me cram 3 months of study into one day and still ace the exam. Firstly, when I take my notes, I try to find diagrams to summarize the concepts I learn. I find that diagrams are like anchors. They're hard to forget, and even if I can't remember them clearly, they still remind me of the overall concept. But now I don't always have time to find diagrams, so I always include another form of visual information that improves our recall, and that's location. This is because we automatically associate what we see with where we physically saw it. And it's why studies consistently show that reading printed text results in better understanding and memory, because we don't just get to remember the information, but also where that information came from. So what I do is group all my notes into a logical structure and then print them out. Each page then gives every bit of information its own location. Now, as highlighted in the study and in many others, I start creating mental photographs to increase the retention of visual information. Firstly, I close my eyes and picture the information's location within my stack of notes. Then I visualize what the page looks like, and then recite its information until I can do it 5 times without any mistakes. Then I move on to the next topic. Now, according to the study, you don't need to repeat things 5 times, especially if you're memorizing images, but repetition is a key driver for our memory, which alongside mental imagery is the first strategy that saved my grades. But now, what if you could remember things without even trying to memorize them? Well, you actually do this all the time without realizing. See, we probably forget most people's name as soon as they tell us, but what happens if someone tells you their name and you find them incredibly attractive? You've only seen them once and their name and face get seared into your memory. This is because of a neurochemical called dopamine. Dopamine is released whenever we see a benefit from the information we're receiving, and more importantly, dopamine directly activates the parts of the brain responsible for forming memories. And this happens automatically even if we're not trying to memorize anything. See, dopamine is foundational for our memory, so much so that people with higher levels of dopamine can store twice the amount of information in their working memory. So the key here is that when you're genuinely excited to read something, you don't need to put in effort to remember it. But again, this leads to a big problem, because most of the time we read for school or work, which for my undergraduate degree, even though I kind of wanted to do well, I never had that genuine desire. But that changed in my master's when I decided that scoring straight high distinctions would finally prove to myself that I'm capable. All of a sudden, doing well actually meant a lot to me, and I was learning 10 times faster. So before you read something, consider how the information would transform your self-image, finances, health, or relationships. Because it's only when you genuinely desire the information that your brain gives you the dopamine to become an information sponge. Now, usually we try to remember the right way of doing things, but what if a better way isn't to do that at all? See, we can probably all remember moments where we've made a huge mistake and felt extremely bad. Despite these moments happening only once and the fact that we probably want to forget them, it's almost like we can never forget. This is because when we make a mistake, our brains release 3 neurochemicals: dopamine, epinephrine, and acetylcholine. And just like dopamine, epinephrine and acetylcholine directly activate the formation of long-term memories. It's our brain's way of saying there's something to learn here, that our existing knowledge needs to change or we'll make the same mistake again. In other words, when you try to apply new information, you kick your brain into memorizing mode. But it's not that straightforward. The timing of this application also matters. See, have you ever wondered why you can feel like you're learning a lot from a YouTube video, but then not remember anything the very next video? Well, it's because everything we learn initially gets stored into our short-term memory, which unfortunately can only store 4 bits of information at any given moment. This means unless we quickly convert our short-term memories into long-term ones, they'll eventually get overwritten by new information and never make it into our long-term memory. This means after every YouTube video or chapter, we need need to immediately pause and at the very least think about how to apply the information rather than just observe the information, or else it'll disappear. But whilst many books are great at teaching concepts, many just leave it up to you to figure out how to apply them, requiring even more effort on top of the huge amount it already takes to read. This is where having a really good book guide, or at least copying the thinking of a good book guide, can help you get this done in less time. See, a few months ago, Shortform gave me access to their book guide platform, and I found a few things we can learn from them that I think would make remembering things a lot easier. Firstly, as they summarize the information, they connect in relevant ideas from other books, and this takes advantage of what's called associative memory, where if we draw links between new ideas and existing ones, it makes them easier to remember because now they're linked to something we already know. What Shortform also does is develop their own conclusions from the information, note practical ideas on how to take action, and come up with questions for each chapter to guide you in applying the concepts. It's this practical layer of thinking we should always be doing whenever we're reading something, and it's so effective that for one guide, I only read their questions and I still remember the concept months later. So if there's a book you want to learn but you don't have the time, you can get a free trial of Shortform and an additional 20% off their annual plan using my affiliate link in the description, where you'll get access to thousands of detailed book guides for the price of one book a month. Now, what if some of the biggest improvements to your memory don't actually come from trying to improve your memory and don't even require any extra effort? See, you may have noticed whenever you sit down to read, it initially feels difficult to focus your attention, but then 10 to 15 minutes later, focusing becomes a lot easier. That's because in order to enter a state of focus, our brains release dopamine, epinephrine, and acetylcholine. See, the same neurochemicals responsible for our memory are also responsible for our focus. In other words, our memory is completely dependent on our ability to focus. So here are two strategies that improve my memory without any extra work. Strategy 1 is to listen to specific frequencies of sounds which boost the release of dopamine and acetylcholine. These are called binaural beats, and for me and many others, it's almost like flicking a switch into deep focus. I'll leave a link for the one I listen to in the description. Strategy 2 is to work when your body has the highest levels of dopamine. This is before we've drained our dopamine through distractions like social media, video games, or our phone. Because of this and our body clock, this means our dopamine tends to be highest at the start of the day. And this was so noticeable for me that I completely quit video games. So we've seen that dopamine is critical for our memory, yet the main way our brains give us healthy levels of dopamine is when we become extremely motivated. So if you want to become highly motivated, I break down the science in this video right here. Till then, you only live this life once. Make the most of it.